I want to begin with what he did, not what I did. Because if you understand the way Nathan treated me from the beginning, you might understand how I managed to misunderstand everything that came after. I'm 23 years old. My name is Bree. My parents died last October when a drunk driver ran into them on I-85 outside Charlotte. They were both killed instantly. I'm not going to spend much time on the accident because that is not what this story is about. But you need to know it happened. Losing them is why I left Charlotte. Leaving Charlotte is how I met Nathan. And that's where all of this began. I inherited enough money to buy a house without a mortgage. My parents had always been careful with money. They had a good insurance, no debt on their home, and savings they had built over 30 years of working. Everything went to me because there was no one else. I want you to understand what that felt like. Not the money, the fact that I was the only one left. One day, you're someone's daughter. You belong to a family that has always existed around you, even when you're not thinking about it. Then, all of a sudden, you're an orphan and no one left to call. I have always wanted to live in Houston. I liked the size of it, the endless spread of neighborhoods, the heat, the food, and the feeling that the city was still changing. After my parents died, I decided to go. I applied for an office position at a furniture design firm downtown, and I received an offer. Then I bought a one-way ticket and contacted a realtor recommended by a friend who had moved to Houston the year before. His name was Nathan Voss. He worked for Meridian Realty Group. We first met on a video call because I was still in Charlotte, finishing everything that needed to be handled after my parents died. Nathan seemed like someone who genuinely enjoyed his work. His interest didn't feel rehearsed or exaggerated. He asked practical questions and listened carefully to the answers. Did I want a neighborhood where I could walk to restaurants and shops? Did I want somewhere quiet? How far was I willing to commute? Then he asked about the house itself, natural light, outdoor space, storage, layout, and design style. He took notes while I answered. Over the next 3 weeks, we spoke almost every day. Nathan sent listings with his own notes attached. He didn't simply forward the description written by the seller's agent. This one has good bones, but the photographs hide how much work it needs. The primary bathroom is smaller than it appears online. This neighborhood is growing quickly, but you will be moving in before it feels fully established. That could be a good investment if you plan to stay for several years. He paid attention to more than the things I said directly. He seemed to understand what I was trying to find before I fully understood it myself. When I flew to Houston to tour the houses, he picked me up from my hotel. I already had a rental car, but he insisted. He said he preferred to discuss each property on the drive, so his clients knew what to expect before walking inside. On the way to the first showing, we reviewed the 3 houses scheduled for that morning. We also talked about Houston. He told me which neighborhoods he had lived in, which restaurants were worth visiting, and about a hiking trail outside the city that he thought was overlooked. There was something easy and natural about him that drew me in almost immediately. He asked thoughtful questions, remembered small details, and made me feel as though he was genuinely listening. After everything I had been through, that attention meant more to me than I understood at the time. We found the house on the second day. It was a 1940s craftsman bungalow in the Heights with 3 bedrooms, original hardwood floors, a screened-in back porch, and a renovated kitchen with its original charm carefully preserved. I loved it as soon as I walked inside. Nathan watched me stop in the kitchen. "That's the face," he said. "What face?" "The one that tells me we don't need to see the last 2 houses." He negotiated the price down $18,000. He guided me through every stage of the closing and often called before I had even thought of the question I needed to ask. When the inspection found a minor problem with the water heater, he persuaded the seller to cover the repair within 24 hours. On the day I closed, he sent me a text. "Keys are yours. Welcome home, Bree." Something softened in me when I read it. For a moment, Houston felt less unfamiliar. Nathan came by on moving day with a bottle of champagne, a small succulent in a terracotta pot, and a card. It says, "For the beginning of something good." He helped direct the movers and carried boxes without being asked. He never called attention to it or acted as though he was doing me a favor. When the movers left, he opened the champagne on the back porch. I didn't have outdoor furniture yet, so we sat on the steps. We toasted to the house and to Houston and to each other. "You're going to love it here," he said. The certainty in his voice stayed with me. 10 days after closing, I invited him to dinner. I called it a thank you dinner. That was the easiest way to describe it, even to myself. I made lamb. I'm a good cook, and I chose a meal that required effort without making the effort too obvious. Nathan, dressed in a new suit, brought a bottle of wine that was better than the one I had planned to open. I took that as evidence that he had thought carefully about the evening too. We talked for 3 hours. Sometime during the second hour, he mentioned a weekend trip and used the word "we." I asked who he meant. That was when he told me about Samantha. They had been together for 3 years. She worked in urban planning. They had met while he was showing a property her firm was consulting on. He spoke about her comfortably. There was no hesitation and no need to explain her place in his life. She was simply part of it. My face was burning. I think I misunderstood some things," I said quietly, but I kept my voice steady. Nathan looked at me. His eyes were kind and patient. He said he hoped he hadn't given me the wrong impression. He told me that he cared about doing right by his clients and that the connection between us had been real. Then he said he valued the friendship we had developed. Friendship. I forced a smile and told him it was fine. I said I had misread the situation and felt embarrassed, but that he didn't need to worry about it. Then I said the lamb was good. He agreed. We finished dinner and he left at 9:30. Afterward, I stood alone in the kitchen of the house he had helped me choose, in the city I had chosen for myself, and felt as though everything around me had become slightly unfamiliar. I understand how the next part looks. From where I am now, the progression is clear. At the time, it didn't feel clear. I believed something genuine had been presented to me, and then quietly taken back. I became convinced that if I looked closely enough, I could understand what had really happened between us. The first thing I did was to search for Samantha online. His full name was Samantha Smith, and her Instagram account was public. It was filled with photographs of her work, her friends, weekend trips, restaurants, and of course, Nathan. The pictures went back 3 years. I looked through all of them. Then I looked through them again. I studied them as though one photograph might contain a detail that changed the meaning of everything else. It did not. They looked happy. That was what I couldn't accept. I created another account using a common name and a generic photograph. Then I followed her. I told myself I was only watching. People look at strangers online every day. That was how I made it seem normal. A week later, I drove past her office building. It was nowhere near where I needed to be. I had seen the name of her firm on Instagram, and I knew roughly where it was. I told myself I was learning my way around Houston. I saw Samantha leave around lunchtime. She looked exactly the way she did in the pictures. Tall, composed, and stylish without seeming overly dressed. I sat across the street in my car and watched her walk to a restaurant on a corner. I felt a wave of jealousy running through my body. Over the next 6 weeks, I crossed one boundary after another. I sent Samantha a private message from the fake account. I didn't threaten her. I told her I thought she should know Nathan had been seeing someone else during their relationship. I made the message specific enough to disturb her, but vague enough that she couldn't prove it was false. She didn't respond. 2 days later, her account became private. I attended one of Nathan's open houses on a Saturday. The property was in Montrose, and I had no intention of buying it. I walked through as though I were interested. Nathan greeted me with a careful friendliness of someone who was surprised to see me, but didn't want the other people in the room to notice. I told him I was thinking to invest in the market. I stayed for 45 minutes. He didn't ask me to leave. Later, I left a note at his office. I wrote that I believed our connection had meant more than he was willing to admit, and that I didn't think the situation was as simple as he had made it sound. Then I began driving past the house he shared with Samantha. Nathan had mentioned the street during one of our property tours as an example of a desirable area. I remembered it. The first time I went there, the lights were on. I parked near the end of the block and watched the house for a while. I know how that sounds. I'm not asking anyone to explain it to me. Nathan called during the 7th week. His voice sounded different. Not cold exactly, but controlled. The warmth that had once made conversation with him feel effortless was gone. He said they knew about the fake account and saw my car parking in their block often. He said they had been documenting my behavior for several weeks. He told me to stop contacting him, Samantha, or anyone associated with either of them. If I continued, they would involve the police. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about. I stayed calm. I have always been good at staying calm when caught. Of course, I didn't stop. 3 weeks later, a process server came to my house. The house Nathan had helped me find. The house where his card still sat in a kitchen drawer. A protective order had been issued. I was required to remain at least 200 feet from Nathan, Samantha, their home, their workplaces, and their vehicles. I read the order twice. Then I called an attorney. She told me the situation was serious and that I needed to follow every condition immediately. Violating the order could lead to criminal charges. I said I understood. For 22 days, I stayed away from them. I deleted the fake account. I stayed away from their neighborhood. I went to work and came home, and that's it. I thought about Nathan often, though. He had been the first person to make Houston feel manageable. Now, I was legally prohibited from going near him. But I continued checking Samantha's public accounts from my real profile. That was the part I couldn't give up. I told myself that looking at public posts was not contact. My attorney hadn't specifically said I couldn't do it. So I told myself I was only watching. One Thursday evening, Samantha posted a photo of a yoga studio's weekend schedule. Her name was tagged in a retreat that ran from Friday through Sunday. The caption said, "Offline for the weekend. Needed this." One of her friends commented below, "Have fun, you deserve it. Nathan will survive 3 days without you." I sat in my kitchen, holding my phone for a long time. I left the house at 10:15 that night. At first, I told myself I was only going for a drive. I sometimes drove when I couldn't sleep. There was comfort in watching the city pass without needing to arrive anywhere. But I headed directly toward their neighborhood. I didn't take a single wrong turn. I drove around their block 3 times. The house was dark. Nathan's car wasn't in the driveway. I decided that meant Samantha was away and Nathan had gone out for the evening. During the first pass, I told myself I only wanted to see the house. During the second, I began wondering about the rooms beyond the windows. Not in a general way. I wanted to know how they had arranged the living room, whether the furniture looked like Nathan's taste or Samantha's, whether they displayed photos of themselves, whether he left his shoes near the door. I wondered what food they kept in the fridge, what kind of coffee he drank at home, what shampoo he used, which side of the bed he slept on. I had seen the life they chose to show online. I wanted to see the part no one else was invited into. By the third trip around the block, I was no longer pretending I'd only come to look at the outside. I wanted to enter their private life. I knew the protective order required me to remain 200 feet away. Once I realized I had already crossed that boundary, I used it as an excuse to cross another. I told myself I was already in violation. I had already done the thing I had been forbidden to do. That should have made me leave. Instead, I decided the damage had already been done. Then I told myself the house was empty. No one would be frightened. No one would even know. I wouldn't steal anything or damage anything. I would only want to look around. I parked 2 streets away and walked back. There were several moments when I could have turned around. I remember each of them, but the urge was so strong, and the rejection I felt from him and the anger made me keep walking. I entered through an unlocked window. The kitchen was dark. It smelled faintly of food that had been cooked earlier and something sweet, possibly a candle. I stood still until my eyes adjusted. There were 2 glasses beside the sink, a bowl for keys near the door, a grocery list attached to the fridge with a magnet. I opened the fridge. There was leftover takeout, almond milk, eggs, vegetables, wine, and several containers I couldn't identify. Nothing remarkable. I studied it anyway. I wanted to know what they ate when they were tired, what Nathan reached for when he opened the fridge late at night. I moved into the living room. Their furniture looked comfortable rather than formal. There were books on the coffee table and a blanket folded across the back of the sofa. Photos stood on a shelf. Nathan and Samantha smiling at a wedding. Nathan standing behind her with his hands resting on her shoulders. The 2 of them on a beach. I looked at every photo. Then I went down the hallway. In the bathroom, I examined the bottles in the shower. His shampoo, her skincare products. 2 toothbrushes beside the sink. I went into their bedroom. The bed was neatly made. There were clothes over the back of a chair and books on both nightstands. I opened drawers. I looked at his clothes, the things he slept in, and ordinary objects he kept beside the bed. I wasn't searching for evidence of an affair. I wasn't looking for proof that their relationship was unhappy. By then, I simply wanted access to the parts of him that had never belonged to me. Every detail made me feel closer to him and more excluded from his life at the same time. That should have been enough to make me leave. Instead, I continued looking. Then a light came on in the hallway. I froze right away. Samantha stepped into the doorway. She hadn't gone to the retreat. She was holding her phone recording me. She looked at me without surprise. Nathan appeared behind her. Neither of them came closer. Then I heard movement from the front of the house. Police officers entered moments later. That was when I understood what had happened. The retreat post, the friend's comment, the dark house. They had expected me to come. They had been waiting to see whether I would cross the boundary again. And I had done more than they needed. I was standing in their bedroom, surrounded by private details of their life, when the officers arrested me. I was charged with violating the protective order. Prosecutors also pursued stalking and burglary charges based on the larger pattern of behavior and my unlawful entry into their home. The burglary charge was the most serious. I was no longer dealing with a case about unwanted messages or driving past someone's house. I had entered their home without permission, and the protective order legally required me to stay away from them. At 2 a.m, I sat in a holding cell in Harris County and thought about the drive, the 3 passes around the block, the moment I parked, the walk back to the house. Every choice had felt small while I was making it. Together, they had brought me into a cell. I was eventually sentenced to 9 years. My attorney told me I could become eligible for parole earlier if I completed the required programs and maintained a good record. I was 23 when the sentence began. I still owned the bungalow in the Heights. The legal fees consumed enough of my inheritance that I had to refinance it. The small succulent Nathan gave me on moving day is probably dead now. No one has been watering it. I have spent a lot of time thinking about what Nathan and Samantha did, what they did to me. They were smart to keep records, save messages, and document each incident. They didn't confront me publicly or retaliate online. They remained careful while I became less careful. Eventually, they lured me to show exactly how far I was willing to go. And I showed them. Part of me is still angry that the post was a bait and that they were waiting inside the dark house, waiting to catch me, to lock me away. I know what the court decided. I know what Nathan and Samantha told themselves they had to do. But they invited me into that trap and then acted offended when I stepped inside. Maybe I crossed the line. Maybe I crossed several. But I still believe Nathan started this when he made me feel chosen and then pretended I had imagined it. They get to call it protection. I call it punishment.